what Bible scholars and theologians often refer to as the compound names for God. And so we're going to spend the next 7 or so weeks exploring what that looks like. We're going to look at the different themes of God's character and how that shapes our lives and also shapes our relationship with him. And so we're going to look at themes like God being present, God being our peace, God being our healer, our provider, our banner, our shepherd, God being our righteousness. There's going to be a host of things. And so as we go on this journey over the coming weeks, it will probably lead us up to the start of the summer. So if that makes you feel hopeful, nothing else will, that the summer is on its way. And we're going to have a number of different people contributing to this series. So really looking forward to hearing some different voices as we kind of explore this together. But as a kind of way of introduction, if you've got a Bible, why don't we turn to Exodus chapter 3. And I want to just, as a way to introduce this series, I guess, before we look at one of those names of God, just going to look at a moment where God reveals his name for the first time. He reveals his name to a person called Moses. The context of what we're stepping into is a context of suffering. The nation of Israel are in slavery. They're enslaved to the Egyptians. They're oppressed. They're beaten. And they're crying out to God that somehow God would step in and he would rescue them. And at the same time, the central character to this story, Moses, he's also suffering too. Moses was a Jewish baby who was adopted into Pharaoh's household. He had this kind of amazing, privileged upbringing. But as he grew into adulthood, he became more aware of his Hebrew roots. And as he became older, he became more aware of the oppression of the people that he came from. And on one occasion, he witnesses an Egyptian beating a Hebrew slave. And suddenly, he sees the injustice and the oppression going on. And he steps in to stop what is happening. And inadvertently, he kills this Egyptian slave driver. Realizing what he's done, he runs for his very life into the desert. And he's not just in the desert for a few weeks or a few months. He's actually there for 40 long years. He literally puts himself into kind of exile. He runs away. And so suddenly all that Moses knew, all his privilege that he grew up with, all his wealth, all his comfort is gone. Moses' life has become something very, very different. And so it's in the midst of Israel's suffering and the midst of Moses' suffering, when all hope has kind of disappeared, all hope has gone, that God speaks. And so Exodus 3 and picking up in verse 7, it said, "The Lord said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I've heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I'm concerned about their suffering. So I've come down to rescue them from the hands of the Egyptians and bring them up out of that land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey." And then he talks about a bunch of people with ites at the end of their name. And in verse 9, it says this, "And now the cry of the Israelites has reached me, and I have seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. So now go, I'm sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt." Now, Moses understandably sees this request as a little crazy. He understands how the system works in Egypt. The Egyptians were a nation who found prosperity in enslaving other nations of people. It was key to their economic system. There was no way Pharaoh was going to turn around and say, okay, Moses, I'm going to set them free. There they go. There was no way that was going to happen. And Moses' response, it kind of shows this. In verse 11, he says, but Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? And God said, I will be with you. And this will be a sign to you that it is I who have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you, meaning the Israelites, will worship God on this mountain. Moses said to God, suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? Then what shall I tell them? God said to Moses, I am who I am. This is what you are to say to the Israelites. I am has sent me to you. God also said to Moses, say to the Israelites, the Lord, the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has sent me to you. This is my name forever, the name you shall call me from generation to generation. Now, this is a significant moment in the whole kind of biblical narrative. It's a turning point, not only in the life of Moses, but also for God's people, as God himself reveals his name. But what we see in response to this is actually Moses actually asking the wrong question. And he's like, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh? Who am I? I'm not that good, God. I'm weak. I can't speak. How on earth will Pharaoh listen to me? Who am I? But you see, that's totally the wrong question. You see, this call, this mission that lays before him is not dependent on Moses' skills and ability. You see, the question should never be, who am I? The question is, who are you? Who is this God? Who are you, God, to send me to Pharaoh? Don't you know what Pharaoh is like? What Pharaoh can do? Don't you know, Lord, what Pharaoh's response will be? But little does Moses realize that the backdrop of this task laid before him is the fact that I am is sending him. You see, the key question any of us need to ask when God is sending us to do anything isn't, have I got what it takes? Have I got the goods? The truth is, none of us have, in case you're wondering. It should never be, have I got what it takes? It should always be, who is this God in light of what he's asking me to do? And you see, this series that we're going to be doing is really a series about God. It's not about us or our ability to do anything, but it's about who he is. Now, when someone reveals their name to you, they reveal a couple of things. First of all, they reveal their identity. This is who I am. So when God does this, he's really kind of distinguishing himself from all the other gods out there. He's not one of a collection of gods. And by revealing his name, God is making his identity super clear. You see, the generic name for God in the Bible is Elohim. That's the Hebrew name for God. But instead, God says, my name is Yahweh. My name is Yahweh. He's like Moses, you don't have to worry about this mission that I'm sending you on. You don't have to worry. You don't have to worry about mistaking my identity. You don't have to worry what the people will question. They might question who is sending you but they need to know the reality is, I am sending you. You see, God reveals his name to Moses. He reveals his identity, but he also reveals his name to Moses to kind of initiate relationship. The names we use for people denotes the kind of relationship we have with them, don't we? So if you're a parent and you have to go to parents' evening at school, and you shake the hand of your child's teacher and you're thinking, why do they look so young? But they probably refer to you by your surname, don't they? They probably say hello. If it's my case, they say Mr. G or Sir. That's the kind of relationship that I have with my daughter's teacher. But if Tammy referred to me as Mr. G or Sir, that would be strange, wouldn't it? It would be weird. And so the name that we use for people denotes the kind of relationship that we have with them. And what God is saying to Moses is saying, you don't need to know me as Elohim, the generic name, but you can know me as Yahweh. And that's quite profound, being on first name terms with the maker of the universe. And so this is the turning point in the story of God's people. They get to know getting to know him by name, Yahweh. And because this is such an holy moment, the Jewish people would never write down that name in case it would get defiled in some way. And not only would they never write it down, but they would never say that name out loud. And so instead they came up with other names. It's a bit Harry Pottery, he who must not be named. Yeah, that's probably a bad analogy. But they, witchcraft and all that. But I shouldn't have gone there. And so instead they came up with another name, okay? So it was a bit like that. And so they came up with the name Adonai, which means Lord or Master. Or they came up with the word Hashem, which literally means the name, okay? And you see, they developed this system to protect the sacredness of God's name that was revealed to them as God's people. And so over the coming weeks, we're going to take that name, Yahweh, which, just to complicate things, most scholars would say that the name Yahweh is pronounced Jehovah. Okay, it makes no sense, I know, but the Hebrew alphabet, there are no vowels, and Y sound like J. Okay, but that aside, okay, we're gonna take this name Yahweh, and we're gonna look at what's often referred to, as I say, the compound names of God found in the Old Testament. And these compound names reveal something to us of God's character and what he is like. And so we're going to look very quickly this morning at the name Yahweh Shammah, which means the Lord is there. Or to put it another way, the Lord is present. And so to do that, we're going to quickly turn to the book of Ezekiel. Ezekiel chapter 48. If you're not sure where that is, it's near the book of Daniel. If you're not sure where that is, then don't worry. Just look in the contents. Doesn't make you extra holy if you know what it is. Okay, Ezekiel 48. And Ezekiel was a prophet during another time that God's people were enslaved. They were in exile in Babylon. And so at this time, God's people, again, they aren't flourishing. They're not in the promised land. They're not in that place flowing with milk and honey. But they're back in slavery, being conquered by the Babylonians. The temple has been destroyed, the city destroyed, and the Israelites, as I say, have been dragged back into slavery by the Babylonians. And whilst God's people are in that place, God gives them a prophet in the form of Ezekiel, and he has this amazing vision of the future. And he begins to describe what a new, restored Jerusalem would look like. A new Jerusalem, a new temple, a city that has been restored, but not just any city, a heavenly city. And so in many ways, Ezekiel's vision is quite apocalyptic. It has a similar rhyme and rhythm with the book of Revelation. You know, where Revelation 21:22, where it talks about a new heaven, a new earth. This is a similar kind of language, similar kind of pictures are being painted. Now, in no way could we read through the book of Ezekiel this morning because we haven't got that much time. And suffice to say, it's also very weird. It's a very strange book, and also has like very minutiae detail that I don't quite understand why it was important to know. But what we're going to do is we're just going to read verse 35 of Ezekiel 48. And it says this: the distance all around will be 18,000 cubits. There you go. You get a kind of flavor for the book of Ezekiel. Whatever cubits are, I don't know. But this is the important bit. It says, and the name of the city from that time on will be, the Lord is there. Yahweh Shammah. The name of this magnificent city, the name of this restored Jerusalem will be, the Lord is there. Right now, you're in Babylon. Right now, it doesn't feel like God is here. But the hope is when everything is restored, when everything is made right, God will be present. God will be there. So what does this reveal to us about the character of God and what God is like? Well, particularly when we think about the context in which this is being written. It's written in a time when God's people are not flourishing. It's written to a people in pain, a people who are suffering. You know, when we're in pain, when we're suffering, when life seems to throw us a curveball, when we experience our own kind of exile in Babylon, it's easy to think, isn't it? Where is God? Where is God? Where is God when I received that diagnosis? Or where is God when I lost that dream job? Where is God when my marriage fell apart? Where is God when I lost everything? Where is he? A German Holocaust survivor by the name of Elie Wiesel, he wrote a book talking about his experience with his father in the Nazi concentration camps. And in one part of the book, he describes the execution of 3 Jewish men. Among them was a young boy. And he talks about how they would make their march past those who were being tortured and executed. And he said this, he says, then came the march past the victims. The 2 men were no longer alive. Their tongues were hanging out swollen and bluish. But the 3rd rope was still moving. The child, too light, was still breathing. And so he remained for more than half an hour, lingering between life and death, withering before our eyes. And we were forced to look at him at close range. He was still alive when I passed him. His tongue was still red. His eyes were yet not extinguished. Behind me, I heard a man asking, for God's sake, where is God? And from within me, I heard a voice answer, where is he? This is where, hanging here from the gallows. In other words, what Vissel was saying was that God was dead. God was dead, because how could anyone rationally believe God was around with all that atrocity? And as a result of some of those horrible things that took place during the Holocaust, actually atheism swept through Germany after the war. How could anybody rationally believe in a God who would allow such suffering to take place? God is hanging in the gallows. He's dead. And that became the mood of the people. But you see, the truth is, and as one theologian said, reflecting on this very story that Vissel wrote, he said this, he said, God was there hanging in the gallows, but not in a detached way, not as a God indifferent to our pain, but a God found in the midst of it. You see, that's what distinguishes our faith from all the other faiths. You see, most other faiths accept this kind of Greek idea of God being impassible. This notion that God cannot suffer since God stands outside of the realm of human pain and sorrow. But as Moltmann wrote in his book, The Crucified God, he says, a God who cannot suffer is poorer than any man. For a God who is incapable of suffering is a being who cannot be involved. He cannot weep, for he has no tears. He is a loveless being. Where is God in our pain? Where is God in our suffering? Where is God when life falls apart? He's Yahweh Shammah. He's the God who is there. He's the God that's present in the midst of our pain, our suffering. He's the God who's present when we don't have the answers, where we feel overcome with emotion because of the situations or the circumstances that we find ourselves in. He's Yahweh Shammah. He's the God who's there. You see, we believe, don't we, in a God who steps into creation, who lived as a first century Jew, who suffered at the hands of men, who was beaten, mocked, and hung naked on a cross. We believe in a God who suffered for our sake, even to the point of death. He isn't this impassible being who avoids suffering. He's a God who jumps right into the middle of it. He's Yahweh Shammah. I want to finish with a video this morning. It's an interview with a fairly well-known person.
Will take
if you
away
can
the pain and discomfort.
hold off for a second. If we could click off it and go back, that's right. 1 second, mate. It's a video from Brené Brown. And Brené Brown is probably famous for a TED talk that she did on the subject of shame and learning to live from a place of vulnerability. And part of that journey, she found herself back in church and recommitting her life to Christ. And in this interview, she talks about coming back to faith. And she says that when she came back to church, she was thinking coming back to faith in Jesus would be like taking an epidural. I've got no idea what that is like, by the way, but I believe it gets rid of pain. Is that true, ladies who have had an epidural? And she thought that somehow just coming back to faith, coming back to church would just simply take away the pain. And what she discovered was that church and faith wasn't an epidural, but actually it was a midwife. And what do midwives do? Midwives stand next to you and they say, push. And they say, it's supposed to hurt. There's going to be some pain, but I'm here. I'm by your side. I know it hurts, but you're going to get through this. You're going to give birth. New life is going to come when the pain ceases. So hold in there. And so it wasn't an epidural. It wasn't something to take away the pain. It was someone to come alongside her in the pain. If we could click on that video, that'd be great.
I thought faith would say, I'll take away the pain and discomfort. But what it ended up saying is, I'll sit with you in it. And I never thought until I found it that would be enough. But it's perfect. It's just, I don't feel alone in it anymore. And I don't feel like I did growing up, where it was a lot of, I went to Catholic school in New Orleans, and it was mostly like magical thinking. Like it was more like there's a reason for everything. Something tragic happens, it was supposed to happen. And I had a mom who was really, very Jungian, very like, we had a horrible loss in our neighborhood growing up, and a woman died. And her son was killed in an accident in her home. And then she was diagnosed with cancer shortly thereafter. And at the funeral, they said something when the little boy died. I think he was a toddler, said something like, and maybe he was in upper elementary school, said, this is not a time to grieve. That's selfish. This is a time to celebrate, because, this child's with God. And that just pissed me off. I just couldn't even make sense of that. And then on the way home, my mom said, I just want to be really clear with you that this is not a time to celebrate, that if you're sad, that's okay. And then she said, and I get really emotional. Thank you for talking about it. She said, because be assured that God is grieving today too. And I was like, huh? She goes, God's weeping too. And I was like, well, that changes everything.
When we see a God who steps into our pain, it changes everything. It changes everything. Some of us have maybe been brought up around church, and we may have experienced church cultures that kind of minimizes suffering or trivializes it. And we're told trite things like, oh, it happens for a reason. And the truth is, evil and horrible things happen. And we all experience pain. We all feel sorrow. We all get hurt. And our question might be, where is God? Where are you, God, in that? And the answer is Yahweh Shammah. And that's good news. You see, no matter how dark things get, no matter how painful things might be, we have a God who enters into our pain and our suffering. A God who feels what we feel. A God who hangs from the gallows in a Nazi concentration camp. A God who feels our pain and suffering and loss and anguish and our disappointment. A God who weeps and mourns in our sorrow. That's the God who is there. That's the God who is present. That's Yahweh Shammah. And so why don't we stand together if we can?